Chuck Norris couldn't or wouldn't do. The 86-year-old, long deemed invincible, has died suddenly, leaving his legion of fans in shock.
Chuck Norris once said the camera never lied about a man's character for long, and 9 days before his death, it caught him exactly as he wanted to be remembered. Fists up, sweat on his brow, laughing in the Hawaiian sun, captioning the video with 5 words that would circulate for weeks afterward: "I don't age. I level up." 9 days later, on March 19, 2026, the man the internet had killed off in hoaxes more times than anyone could count actually died, quietly, in a hospital on the island of Kauai. And when his family finally spoke, what they revealed wasn't just grief. It was the outline of a fortune, a secret, and a legacy far more complicated than any roundhouse kick ever suggested. Norris had been vacationing at his oceanfront home on Kauai's North Shore, a property he and his wife Gina O'Kelly had loved for years, when he was rushed to the hospital. Hours later, he was gone at age 86. For a celebrity who had survived internet death hoaxes going back over a decade, fabricated stories claiming he'd died in a car crash in 2023, and false posts during the pandemic years insisting he'd succumbed to COVID, the real announcement arrived with a strange quiet. There was no viral rumor to debunk this time, only a brief, careful statement from the people who actually knew him. They didn't disclose a cause of death. They asked simply for privacy, and for the world to know he'd been surrounded by family, at peace. Within it was one line that stopped people mid-scroll: gratitude not for watching his movies, but for loving him. The tributes came fast. Public figures across the political spectrum, entertainment reporters, and the network he'd once dragged into a bruising legal fight all offered praise for a man whose off-screen convictions were as central to his identity as his on-screen fists. It was, briefly, a moment of unified mourning for someone who had spent much of his life positioned outside Hollywood's mainstream, pushing back against it even as it kept paying him. Then came the number. Financial outlets moved quickly to estimate what Norris left behind, and the figure that emerged, cited by celebrity net worth and referenced in coverage from Fortune and Newsweek, landed at approximately $70 million. On its own, the number tells you almost nothing. What matters is how he built it, who stands to inherit it, and the legal war he waged quietly for years to make sure a significant piece of it existed at all. His estate is not a single asset but a sprawling collection of them. There's the Lone Wolf Ranch in Navasota, Texas, roughly 1,000 acres in Grimes County that became the family's full-time home after Norris largely stepped back from Hollywood around 2012. There's the Kauai vacation property, estimated at $7 million, the very house where he died. There's Seaforce Bottling Company, a water business born from an accidental discovery beneath the Texas ranch. There are decades of film royalties, book income from titles like his 2004 memoir Against All Odds and his 2008 book Black Belt Patriotism, endorsement money from a nearly 30-year fitness infomercial partnership, and syndication revenue from a television show that once aired in more than 100 countries. No will has been made public, which means Texas community property law governs much of what happens next. Under that law, Gina O'Kelly, as his surviving spouse, is entitled to half the marital estate by default, with the remainder distributed among his children. He had 5 of them, spanning 2 marriages and 1 relationship he managed to keep hidden from public view for nearly 3 decades. What's already clear is that Gina holds a controlling 51% stake in Seaforce as its chief executive, which means the water company stays firmly in her hands no matter how the broader estate gets divided among the children. One person who will not be part of that inheritance is Norris's first wife, Diane Holchek. She died in December 2025, just 3 months before Chuck, after a long illness. The two had divorced back in 1989, but their sons, Mike and Eric, remained by her side until the end. In the final stretch of his own life, Norris lost his mother and then his first wife within months of each other, before following them himself before spring arrived. It's a detail that rarely makes the headlines about a $70 million estate, but it says something essential about the man underneath the persona, someone absorbing loss after loss in private while the public still saw only the myth. And there is a piece of that private life that stayed hidden for almost 30 years. Long before Walker, Texas Ranger, before the film career, before a single karate chop reached a movie screen, Carlos Ray Norris was a self-described neurotic, painfully shy teenager from Ryan, Oklahoma. He was born a blue baby, entering the world with dangerously low oxygen and nearly not surviving birth at all. His mother, Wilma, raised 3 sons largely alone while working low-paying jobs. His father, a World War II veteran, struggled with alcohol and would disappear for months, and Norris later wrote that the house felt calmer in his father's absence than in his presence. The family bounced from Oklahoma to Kansas to California chasing work. By the time he graduated from North Torrance High School in 1958, nobody around him would have predicted anything close to what came next. That same year, he enlisted in the Air Force and married his high school sweetheart, Diane Holchek. She was 17, he was 18. Stationed in South Korea, Norris wandered into a Tang Soo-do class at Osan Air Base and found the thing that would define the rest of his life. He trained 4 hours a day, 5 nights a week, and earned his black belt within 13 months. He would later describe it as the first time he'd accomplished anything difficult entirely on his own, and that single realization, more than any fight scene, is arguably the real engine behind everything that followed. After his discharge in 1962, while waiting to become a police officer, he began teaching karate in his parents' backyard and eventually built a chain of more than 30 karate studios across Southern California, training celebrities including Steve McQueen, Priscilla Presley, and Bob Barker. He became a 6-time professional karate champion. Then, at a 1967 tournament in New York, Bruce Lee spotted him, and the two spent 2 years training together and debating fighting philosophy in Lee's backyard. When Lee needed a villain for the climactic fight in The Way of the Dragon, filmed illegally over 5 days in the Roman Colosseum after Italian authorities denied permission, he called Norris. The film cost around $130,000 to make and eventually grossed roughly $130 million worldwide. Norris became famous, oddly, for losing, for being the man Bruce Lee defeated on screen. It was Steve McQueen who eventually pushed him toward acting, and Norris enrolled in classes at MGM. His early films built a loyal audience, and by 1993 he'd appeared in more than 20 of them. But it was television that turned him into something closer to an American institution. Walker, Texas Ranger premiered on CBS in April 1993 and nearly collapsed before it began, after its original production company went bankrupt partway through the first season. CBS saved it once ratings numbers came in strong, and what followed was 9 seasons and 203 episodes, filmed entirely in Texas, a first for a primetime American drama. Norris controlled the creative direction through his own production company, insisted on storylines aligned with his Christian faith, brought his brother Aaron on as co-producer, and sang the theme song himself. His contract reportedly paid $375,000 per episode plus a percentage of profits, with syndication deals, including a 1997 agreement with USA Network worth $750,000 per episode, multiplying his earnings for years afterward. Court filings would later reveal the franchise had generated total revenue exceeding $690 million. That figure is also where the story turns adversarial. In 2018, Norris sued CBS and Sony, alleging the companies had structured their streaming and distribution deals specifically to avoid triggering the profit participation clause in his contract, and that they hadn't reported streaming revenue to him since 2004. The case dragged on for 5 years before quietly settling in 2023 for an undisclosed sum, money that is now part of the very estate his family is dividing. There's another chapter of his life he chose to keep almost entirely private. In 1962, while awaiting discharge in Riverside, California, Norris met a woman named Johanna and, without disclosing that he was already married, began a brief relationship with her. Their daughter, Dina, was born the following year. Johanna eventually discovered the truth, raised Dina on her own, and instructed her, once Dina was old enough to know, never to make contact with her father, given that he had a wife and other children. For 26 years, Dina carried that instruction. Then, 2 years after Norris's divorce from Diane became public in 1989, she wrote him a letter. In his memoir, Norris described the moment he saw her standing in his living room and recognized his own face looking back at him, no test required. What he wrote afterward became one of the more quoted lines of his career, a reflection on illegitimate parents rather than illegitimate children. Dina was folded fully into the family, and by 2015 he was publicly posting vacation photos with her and her children from the same island where he would, a decade later, take his last breath. Beyond the fame and the fortune, there was a health crisis that nearly broke the family from the inside. In late 2012, Gina underwent a series of MRI scans using a gadolinium-based contrast agent, a substance meant to pass through the body harmlessly within hours. In her case, it didn't. She described a burning sensation spreading through her body, followed by tremors, kidney damage, and muscle deterioration so severe she was eventually surviving on baby food, while doctors ruled out cancer, ALS, Parkinson's, and multiple sclerosis one by one. Norris eventually arranged private transport to Reno for chelation therapy after specialists confirmed her gadolinium levels were extraordinarily high, and he stayed by her side for months, reading to her, effectively stepping away from his acting career to keep her alive. The ordeal cost the family close to $2 million out of pocket and led to a 2017 lawsuit against 11 pharmaceutical companies, congressional testimony that helped push the FDA to add new warning labels to the drugs involved, and eventually a voluntary dismissal of the case in 2020 with no settlement reached. The fortune he leaves behind reflects all of it. The ranch that became a full second act, the water company built on an accidental discovery beneath volcanic rock, the fitness partnership with Christy Brinkley that ran in 85 countries for nearly 30 years, and the Kickstart Kids Foundation he launched in 1990, which grew to serve tens of thousands of students across dozens of Texas schools and which, by most accounts, he considered his proudest achievement above any film role. It also reflects the fights he was willing to have quietly, for years, against institutions far larger than himself, simply because he believed he was owed what he was owed. In the days after his death, arguments broke out almost immediately over how he should be remembered, as a devout Christian and longtime conservative political voice who wrote a column for nearly 20 years, or as the actor and philanthropist whose foundation changed thousands of young lives, or simply as the internet meme that outlived every hoax written about him. Perhaps that argument was inevitable for a man who spent decades being simplified into a punchline even as he quietly built a diversified fortune, fought pharmaceutical companies, sued a television network, and raised a daughter he'd once been told to stay away from. What his family asked for, in the end, wasn't admiration for his box office numbers or his television ratings. It was something smaller and harder to quantify: gratitude for having loved him, the actual man, the one who slept on a couch for months to nurse his wife back to health and drove to a Reno clinic in a private plane rather than accept a diagnosis he refused to believe. That's the inheritance that doesn't show up on any estate filing, and it may be the one that mattered to him most.